Thus far, Rabbi Nachman has explained to us a very beautiful, very deep, very important concept. Anybody who's looking for the truth, anybody wants to connect to Hashem in a deeper way, he often has to go through many trials and tribulations in his life, many difficulties. What's the main difficulty? What's the main trial that a person has to go through when he's searching for the truth? So Rabbi Nachman explains that the main trial is from the insults and the vilification of others. This itself is the greatest barrier to actually achieving the truth, because it's the greatest deterrent. Nobody likes to be made fun of. Nobody likes to be accused of things that are not true. And many people, when this happens to, they fold. They stop pursuing this thing. Even if they know it's the truth, even if they know that this is their deepest truth, they give up on it. So we see from here that the greatest mania to truth is the one that opposes the one who has it. Now Rabbi Nachman comes to say that the one who's holding on to the truth, his name is Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov comes from the root Ekev, which means heel. Why is his name Ekev? Because the truth, which is made up of the letters of Aleph, Mem, Taf, that's the first, middle, and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The reason why the truth is the beginning and the middle, the end, is because the truth takes time to bear out. The truth is not revealed immediately. The only time that a person can actually experience that something is the truth is to see it through until the end. This is as opposed to sheker, which we know that these three letters in the Hebrew alphabet are all right next to each other. And this is to symbolize the fact that when it happens, when there's a lie, it's very juicy. Right away, it feels like, wow, this is it. But just as soon as it comes up, it goes away. It's also true of the Yetzer Hara. When it tries to throw difficulties and challenges at you, they feel very intense. They feel like this is all that there is. But if you're able to just hold on, you'll see that just like the wave comes up so strong, it also departs like that as well. The truth is steady. The truth continues. The truth persists. And ultimately in the end, if the truth doesn't give up, then the truth will be revealed in the end. So Yaakov's name is Ekev because it's only at the end that Yaakov's greatness is revealed. His truth is revealed. The goodness of Yaakov. But Rabbi Nachman teaches that for every Yaakov, there's Lavan. We know that Lavan was Yaakov's father-in-law. Sorry, Yaakov was his uncle. So when Yaakov was running away from Esav, and Esav represents physical desires. So Yaakov, representing the tzaddik, he's running away, so to speak, from his lower physical self. Because Esav's trying to kill Yaakov. But ultimately, what happens when he achieves this high level of running away from Esav, he's confronted by Lavan. So this is a very deep, important inyan. Because that person who, so to speak, runs away from the secular world or runs away from things that he knows are not true, he thinks that that's the end. Now I'm just going to live a sweet life, a peaceful life, a good life. Why? Because I ran away from that which I know now to be vain. Something limited, something which maybe the secular world deems to be the greatest pleasure, but I understand now that this is something which is very ephemeral, this is something very limited, and actually you don't come out with anything from it, so you run from that. But now all of a sudden, that same person is confronted by Lavan. Lavan, now Rabbi Nachman says, refers to the Talmid Chacham, so this is a very, very big chiddush. That you would think that Lavan, the next enemy of Yaakov, the next enemy of the truth seeker, is represented by somebody like Esav. But in this case, it's not. So to speak, Lavan is the religious Jew himself. Okay? Now we have to grapple our minds around this. What does that mean? So he says that he is the Talmid Chacham. He's the one who is baki, he's expert in the oral Torah and halacha. And yet, Rabbi Nachman then calls him a Sheikh Yehudi, which is very strong language, which means that, so to speak, he's a Jewish scholar demon. What is this coming from? So Rabbi Nachman says like this, Shetorah lityaher unkanter. All the Torah that he's learning is only in order that he should show off and criticize. And about this, Chazal say, such a Talmid Chacham, Nevela Tova Hemenu, a dead animal is better than him. Now, what's the reason a dead animal is better than him? Because the animal who passes away, he has now went down one level, right? He went from alive to being dead. But this Talmid Chacham, this speaking spirit, this human being who is connected to the truth and utilizes it for the opposite purpose, so he has actually went down many levels of reality. He has not just went from a speaking spirit to passing away. He has went down to the level of not just a behemoth, but less than a dead behemoth, less than a dead animal. The reason why that Chazal is so strong in their language of a person who's learning not for the right reasons is because it says elsewhere in the Gemara that the Torah can either be a spice of life or a spice of death. The truth can either give life to the one who possesses it, or if he's utilizing it for selfish or ego-related reasons, it actually becomes the cause of spiritual death for him and for those around him. I remember when I was in the beginning of my stage of becoming Bal Tshuva, I had a lot of challenges and questions because I saw a lot of this. It's even hard for me to speak about these things because I'm nothing. But even from my untrained eye, and I didn't even see this teaching yet, it seemed like I saw a lot of Talmid Chacham that were Shed Yehudim, a lot of Jewish scholar demons. And when I spoke to rabbis about it, they all said, what are you talking about? You don't know enough. You just got here. And everything was swept under the rug. And I couldn't let it go. It was bothering me tremendously because either the Torah that I was reading it wrong, or there was a huge problem. And I didn't know which one it was. I really didn't. So I was going to people who know more than me, ostensibly, to see what's going on. What's the reconciliation between these two things? And then I eventually spoke to, who at that point was the biggest rabbi that I had spoken to since my journey began. And there was a whole party going on. I wasn't interested, so I went to the Beit Midrash, and I saw this rabbi sitting there, learning quietly, head over the book. So I went over to him, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is a chance to speak to him alone. And I opened my heart to him, and I told him about my struggles, my challenges, what I saw in the Torah versus what I saw in the world. And he looked at me with the most genuine, most serious, most empathetic look. And he said back to me, that's why we need you. You're right. Everything you said is true. That's why we need you. And I said, what? He said, yeah, that's the whole reason for Bali Tshuva. They're supposed to come back and teach us Torah. They're supposed to come back and teach us what it means to be close to Hashem. That's what a Bal Tshuva is supposed to be. He comes in with new eyes, with unjaded perceptions that are not based on culture or history. He's seeing, so to speak, the Torah for what it is. And he comes back and he challenges those who are religious to rethink, are they really living with the truth? Are they living with the truth of truths? And that point, when he told me that, first of all, the fact that he told me that I was right, that was a huge shock to me because I had been told by everybody up until that point that I didn't know what I was talking about. So that itself already was a great source of assurance for me that I wasn't crazy. And then after that, he proceeded to give me the greatest chizuk that I still live with to this day. That's why we need you, that you should teach us Torah. This is a person who's been learning his whole entire life. He probably knows all of Shas and Poskim Bal Peh. And he's telling me that's why we need you, David. At this point, I had been an atheist for 15 years. I had just started learning, right? I was involved still in all types of shtuyot. And he's saying that's why we need you, that you should teach us. And still to this day, this gives me tremendous chizuk and courage to keep standing up and trying to get up to the plate and teach, no matter how many times I get swung and knocked down. Because I remember those words, that there's a place for the Baal Tshuva, and not just that he should be here and be maskim to everything that he hears from people who have been religious from birth, but that he should really strive to find the deepest truth and to live with that truth and to give that truth to others no matter what the response is. And now Rabbi Nachman says, but a person who he learns not for the right reasons, for whatever reason, he's learning because it's making him feel more superior to those around him. He's learning only so that he should disprove another person's reality. He's not learning for the reason of lishma. What is lishma? Lishma means for Hashem's sake. What does that mean practically? It means that person's learning in order to get closer to Hashem, simply. What is the best reason, the only reason to learn Torah? That I should get closer to Hashem, that I should bring others closer to Hashem. That's it. If there's any other reason that I'm learning Torah, Rabbi Nachman says this is not lishma, and it can actually go so far as to be worse than if you never studied at all. In the case of a person that he's learning in order to show off, or in order to be a contrarian to others who are learning for the right reasons. Now Rabbi Nachman says, "V'zeh yedu," and this is known. She'eino nikra talmid chacham ela al yedei Torah sheba'al peh. Nobody is called a talmid chacham, a sage, unless he's fluent, he's expert in the oral Torah. Because a person who knows how to learn the written Torah, he's not called Talmid Chacham, he's not called a sage. Only a person who is expert in the oral Torah and the Jewish law, that person is called a Talmid Chacham. One of the reasons simply is because the written Torah is explicit. It's in your face. You see it. You can memorize it. In fact, even in the non-Jewish world, there are some people who know the written Torah, Baal Peh, they know it by heart even more than Jewish people do. However, the oral Torah, which is tens of thousands of pages of dialectical investigation to be able to draw out the practical application of the teachings that are in the written Torah, this is much, much more difficult to chab. This is much more difficult to gain understanding in, for sure to become expert in, and obviously to memorize, right? But who is a Talmid Chacham? It's someone who's expert at understanding and learning that oral Torah, the one which has been passed down for generation to generation to generation, all the way back from Moshe Rabbeinu, when he received both the written and the oral Torah. This is much, much, much more difficult, and that person is called a Talmid Chacham. That person is called a sage. But when that sage learns without da'at, which in this case Rav Chaim Kramer explains is a person who doesn't have derech eretz. We know that there's a famous chazal, a famous statement from our sages, that being a good person precedes Torah, which simply appears to mean that before I can actually learn the Torah, I first have to be a good person. Or even simpler than that, they use derech eretz for livelihood. Before I can learn Torah, I need money to be able to support myself to do so. However, what we're saying is much deeper than that. That the vehicle, the vessel, the keli, in which I can receive the light of the infinite one, that vessel is that I have derech eretz, that I'm a kind person, that I care about others, that I do for others, that my learning is not for myself alone, but I have greater reasons for the things that I do. That when a person comes up to me when I'm learning and he asks me for a favor, right? Like when I was learning today in the Beit Midrash, somebody came up to me with this tzedakah box and he asked me if I could help him open it. So I smiled and I said, sure. I put the Gemara down. I tried to open it up And, Baruch Hashem, finally, after jiggling along with it, I finally figured out how to open it up, and I gave it back to him. And he said, thank you so much. But you see certain people that you have another Jew who comes up to them, and they ask them for a favor, or they want to speak to them while they're learning. And they look up with like a death stare. That you just interrupted me. How could you? How are you bothering me with your insignificant troubles or problems? And to this, Rabbi Nachman says, it's better that this person was never born. Okay, so it's very intense language, obviously. But the reason is because the Torah and Hashem are one. The Zohar says that Kutsha Brichu Uraita, the Torah and Hashem, they're one. So a person who he is expert, he's baki in the Torah itself, meaning that he is busy constantly with the light of God, he's holding on to it, so to speak. And he doesn't reflect that to other people, to his brothers and sisters in arms. This is worse than a person who never learned it to begin with, because that person has the greatest opportunity to be the greatest revelation of God and to bring the Mashiach, to bring the Geula. There's a story of the Baal Shem Tov that, in the generation of the Baal Shem Tov, he had his Hasidim, he had the people who were around him who really believed in him, who learned his teachings, who sat at his feet, who their whole lives were transformed through the teachings and through the Derech Eretz of the Baal Shem Tov, to the stories of the Baal Shem Tov. However, in the world of the Minagdim, the world which opposed the Baal Shem Tov, which was bigger than his world, which had connected to him, the standard, more traditional, more cultural Judaism that had developed over the course of centuries, so they were called Mitnagdim. Why were they called Mitnagdim? Because they opposed Chassidus, they opposed the Baal Shem Tov, they opposed his students, because they thought that this was heresy, this was apikorsis. And one of the reasons that they felt so strongly against the Baal Shem Tov and his students was because the Baal Shem Tov had re-emphasized the concept of Derech Eretz as being primary. That it was not a better situation that a person should learn Torah day and night and be a bad person while doing so. That's not better than a person who goes to work and he's simple and he's faithful and he's kind to other Jews, right? And that was not looked upon favorably by the normative Jewish world, who had been accustomed to showing that the greatest mile is a person who's a matmid. He never stops learning day and night, even if that means that through doing so, he's not actually a caring, kind individual to others. So this the Baal Shem Tov railed against, which is part of the reason why he had a lot of opposition. There was a time that he went to go to a certain city, a certain town, and there was a person there who never met the Baal Shem Tov, but just from hearing stories about him, he developed a tremendous hatred towards him, and he made himself a promise that he would never meet him if he had the opportunity. He would never come in contact with him. Part of the reason why people didn't want to come in contact with the Baal Shem Tov was because almost everyone who did so ended up becoming a chassid of the Baal Shem Tov, even if they started not like that. So this person was concerned about that situation taking place. So he ended up, when the Baal Shem Tov came to his town and he heard that he was coming, even though Yom V'Layla, he never left the Beit Midrash, this time he decided to leave and go hide in his house so that the Baal Shem Tov wouldn't meet with him and speak with him. However, the Baal Shem Tov obviously had deeper reasons for coming to this town, and he had Ruach HaKodesh. He knew things that were going on that you couldn't see to the physical eye. And the Baal Shem Tov decided to take his students from the Beit Midrash, and he told them to come with him. They walked, and as they were walking, he was teaching them Torah and speaking to them about getting closer to Hashem. And they ended up in front of a certain home. And the Baal Shem Tov opened the door, didn't knock, just opened the door and walked in, and his students followed him. And the Baal Shem Tov came and brought his students in to the living room of this house. And he sat down with them. And he starts to teach them a very deep, complex topic in the Gemara and in Halakha, in Jewish law. So this is exactly what we're speaking about, the concept of the Talmid Chacham. Now, the Baal Shem Tov, which house did he come into? It was that person's home that he was hiding from the Baal Shem Tov. And he just walked right in with his students and began learning this very deep topic, while this person who owned the home, who was running away from the Baal Shem Tov so he wouldn't interact with him, was hiding behind his curtain somewhere. But while he's listening to the conversation of the Baal Shem Tov and his students, he begins to become very excited, because he had not realized from all of the stories that he heard of the Baal Shem Tov, he didn't realize that he was a genius in both the written and the oral and Jewish law. And when he overheard this conversation that he was having with his students about oral law and about halakha, he got so excited that when the Baal Shem Tov posed a question, he jumped out from behind his door and he gave an answer. And the Baal Shem Tov said, that's not the answer. So he starts thinking and he's thinking and he's thinking and he's thinking, and then he gives another answer. And the Baal Shem Tov says, no, that's not the answer either. So now he's like equally frustrated but excited that someone's finally challenging him in his learning, in his depth of knowledge of the oral Torah and of halakha, Jewish law. And he comes up with another answer. And he says, no, those three are not the answer. And all of a sudden, there's a soldier from Ukraine who knocks in the door and comes in with a huge bag on his shoulders, with a weapon in his hands. And he came to make problems for the people in the home. And he starts speaking to the owner of the home and threatening him. And the Baal Shem Tov came up to this soldier and he told him, you're not going to do anything to anyone here. And then he told him, you're going to leave now. But before he left, the Baal Shem Tov told him, wait 1 second. I want to see something. And he goes into this soldier, this non-Jewish soldier, this anti-Semite's bag. He opens up, there's a letter in the bag. And he opens up the letter and he starts to read the letter out loud. And in the letter presented the three answers which this person who owned the house, that he had stated as the teirutz, the reconciliation of the Baal Shem Tov's kasha, his difficulty which he gave to his students. And the Baal Shem Tov said to him, I want you to know something. You see how the three answers you gave me are in this anti-Semite's bag. It's in a letter in his bag. So he said, the reason it's here is because this is where all of your Torah learning is going. All of your Torah learning is going to the Sitra Achra. It's going to the other side. Because Torah learning without being a good person, without being kind, without being empathetic, without loving every Jew like yourself, that Torah learning does not stay in the place of godliness, but it goes to the forces of the Sitra Achra, the forces of negativity, which then utilize that Torah learning to oppress those people who are actually looking for the truth. This person was stunned, and like everybody else who came in contact with the Baal Shem Tov, this person ended up becoming a chassid as well, a student of the Baal Shem Tov as well. So we're going to continue Bezrat Hashem this lesson next time we do a Likutey Moharan class. But we're coming out with a very, very deep understanding of something. The Torah is the light of God. That light of God can only be revealed based on the vessel in which it enters. If the vessel it enters is pure, it's whole, it doesn't have alternative motives, then the light shines out, and mamish, it can give life to everyone around it, including the person who's holding on to it. But when that vessel is black, when that vessel is dark, when that vessel is filled with ego and self-aggrandizement, then that same Torah that enters into that person, into that vessel, then reflects dark light. And that light becomes a source of spiritual death for that person himself and those around him. And in this case, these two instances are the concept of Yaakov and Lavan. Yaakov represents the tzaddik who's learning the Torah for the right reasons. And Lavan represents the Shed Yehudi, the Jewish scholar demon, who's learning it in order that he should oppress Yaakov Avinu himself. Bezrat Hashem will continue later on.